Harold and Martha Ellison spent 47 years, living a quiet life, built on love and loss, never knowing that the man they trusted most was hiding a terrifying secret about their missing son. When a random DNA test shattered their world decades later, the truth they uncovered was darker and more shocking than anyone could have imagined. Greenville, Indiana was the kind of town where time moved a little slower. With its tree-lined streets, tidy lawns, and one blinking stoplight in the center of town, it was the sort of place where neighbors knew one another by name, and families often stayed for generations. Harold taught middle school science, known for his neat ties and patient tone, while Martha worked at the local library 3 afternoons a week, her soft-spoken nature and warm smile making her a favorite among the children who came in for story hour. The Ellisons had one child, a boy named Peter, born in the summer of Peter was a bright, playful child. People in town often remarked how much he looked like Harold, especially around the eye. The family lived in a modest white house with green shutters, just 2 blocks from the school where Harold taught. Their days were routine but joyful: church on Sundays, fishing trips in the spring, picnics at the county park when the weather was good. To anyone looking in from the outside, the Ellisons seemed like a family made of love and stability. Harold was seen as a model father. He volunteered for the PTA, coached the after-school science club, and never missed one of Peter's school plays. Martha kept a tidy home, tended a flower garden in the front yard, and baked pies for church fundraisers. There was never any gossip about the Ellisons, no late-night arguments, no financial troubles, no drama. Greenville was full of hard-working, decent people, but even among them, the Ellisons stood out as especially well put together. In the summer of 1975, life in the Ellison household continued like normal. Harold had started building a treehouse in the backyard for Peter, and Martha was organizing a summer reading program at the library. They were already talking about enrolling Peter in piano lessons. When school started again in the fall, there were no warning signs, no strange behavior, no sense of what was coming. Then everything changed on a warm afternoon in early September. That day, Peter had been playing outside after school while Martha prepared dinner. When she called him in at 5:30, there was no answer. His toy truck sat on the grass. The gate was still closed, but Peter was gone. Within the hour, the police were called. By nightfall, half the town had joined the search. Flashlights swept through fields and wooded trails. Neighbors knocked on doors, and Harold stood in the middle of the yard shouting his son's name over and over. The image of him crumpled to his knees with his hands on his face would stay etched in the minds of everyone who saw it. No one doubted his anguish. No one questioned his pain. Not then. The day Peter disappeared began like any other. The air was warm with the last traces of summer, and the sky was cloudless, a bright shade of blue that seemed to promise nothing but peace. Martha had packed Peter's lunch that morning: peanut butter and jelly, carrot sticks, a cookie, and Harold had walked him to school before heading off to teach his second period science class. Everything felt normal. There was no sense that anything unusual was about to happen. After school, Peter walked home like he always did. It was only 3 blocks. A quiet route lined with maples and oaks. A neighbor saw him pass around 3:15 p.m., skipping slightly and carrying his book bag. He stopped for a moment to pet a cat sitting on a porch railing, then continued on his way. That was the last confirmed sighting of him. By the time Martha called him in for dinner at 5:30, she expected to see him bounding around the side of the house, face flushed from playing, but there was only silence. At first she wasn't alarmed. Maybe he was in the backyard, or had wandered next door. She called again, louder this time. Still nothing. She walked out and began searching, calling his name. When she didn't find him within minutes, she began to panic. Harold arrived home shortly after and found Martha in the front yard, her voice shaking as she explained Peter wasn't anywhere to be found. Harold immediately ran through the neighborhood, knocking on doors, checking every place Peter might have gone: his friend Evan's house, the park down the street, even behind the shed in their own backyard. No one had seen him. The police were called by 6. Within an hour, patrol cars were cruising every street. Officers questioned neighbors and searched nearby woods and alleyways. Volunteers joined the effort, flashlights in hand, scouring the area until long past midnight. Dogs were brought in from a nearby county to track Peter's scent, but they lost it at the edge of the Ellisons' front yard. Local news stations picked up the story almost immediately. A photograph of Peter taken at his kindergarten graduation was plastered on every telephone pole, bulletin board and storefront in town. He wore a blue cap and gown, his eyes wide and full of life. Missing, the posters read, 6 years, last seen wearing red sneakers, jeans and a white t-shirt. As the hours turned to days, panic spread through Greenville. It didn't make sense. There had been no signs of a struggle, no ransom note, no witnesses who had seen anything suspicious. Harold gave an emotional statement to the press, begging anyone with information to come forward. His hands trembled as he spoke, tears streaming down his face. Martha stood beside him, expression hollow. For a town so safe and familiar, Peter's disappearance struck like a lightning bolt, sudden, devastating, and incomprehensible. And just like that, the Ellison family's quiet life was torn open, leaving behind questions no one could yet answer. Weeks turned into months, and the once frantic search for Peter began to slow. The community that had poured its heart into finding the missing boy gradually returned to their routines, though a shadow lingered over Greenville. The posters began to fade in the sun, their corners curling and peeling away. Peter's photo was still taped to the window of the grocery store and pinned near the post office, but fewer people stopped to read them now. Leads had dried up. Every tip that came in, every phone call, every supposed sighting, led nowhere. Police followed them all and each one ended in dead ends and disappointment. The Ellison home grew quieter. Inside, the absence of a child was a constant weight. Peter's room remained untouched. His bed was neatly made, his toys lined up on the shelf, waiting for a boy who would not return. Martha would sometimes sit in his room for hours, holding one of his stuffed animals, staring out the window. Harold buried himself in work, staying longer at school, joining community boards, anything to fill the time and avoid the silence that swallowed their home. Detectives revisited the case many times, hoping fresh eyes might uncover something. They interviewed the Ellisons over and over, searching for inconsistencies, but Harold and Martha's stories remained the same. There was no history of abuse, no signs of family trouble, nothing that pointed to an inside motive. The case became more than a local tragedy. It was a mystery that even the state police couldn't crack. By early 1977, the official classification was made. Peter Ellison's case was cold. No new information had surfaced. No suspects had been named. The possibility that Peter had been taken by a stranger couldn't be proven, and yet it was the theory most accepted. Harold and Martha reluctantly began to move forward, but they never truly let go. Each year on Peter's birthday, they lit a candle in the window. They never took down the swing in the backyard, or the crayon drawings he'd taped to the refrigerator. Their grief took different forms. Martha turned inward, avoiding most social gatherings, rarely seen outside except for church and grocery. Harold, in contrast, stayed active in the community, seemingly determined to maintain a sense of normalcy. People praised his strength and devotion. He spoke often at missing persons events, and even helped organize fundraisers for other families facing similar loss. To many he was a symbol of courage through unimaginable sorrow. But time, as it always does, moved on. New families moved into town, and new tragedies filled the headlines. Peter Ellison became a story older residents whispered about, a cautionary tale told to children when they wandered too far. For the Ellisons, the pain remained as sharp as the day it began. They had no grave to visit, no answers to their questions, just a hole where their son had been, and a town that had long since stopped looking. Nearly 50 years had passed since Peter Ellison vanished from Greenville, Indiana. The world had changed dramatically during that time. Technology advanced, social norms shifted, and the small town itself saw new faces and fresh stories. Harold and Martha had long since aged, their lives marked by the invisible scar left behind by their missing son. They stayed in the same house, maintaining a quiet routine. Harold had retired from teaching years earlier, and Martha spent her days volunteering at the local library and attending church. Peter remained a constant presence in their hearts, a mystery that never fully faded. In 2023, a man named Eric Whitmore, living hundreds of miles away in Columbus, Ohio, decided to take a DNA test. Like many curious about their heritage, Eric was hoping to trace his family roots, understand his background, and perhaps discover relatives he never knew. He ordered a kit from a popular ancestry website, swabbed his cheek, and sent the sample in, unaware that his simple act would unravel decades of secrets. Weeks later, Eric received his result. The report showed connections to distant relatives, a mix of Midwestern European heritage, and unexpectedly, a near-perfect DNA match to a boy named Peter Ellison, someone long declared missing and presumed gone. The system flagged this match as highly unusual, and because of the historical nature of Peter's case, the information was automatically sent to law enforcement for review. Within days, the FBI's Missing Persons Unit reopened the cold case file. Detectives reviewed the original investigation reports, police statements, and news articles from the night. They compared Eric's DNA to the limited samples preserved from Peter's original case, confirming the match. The discovery sent shockwaves through the agents. Here was a man who had lived his entire life, unaware that he was the missing child from a case they had long thought closed. Contacting Eric was delicate. They explained the situation carefully, ensuring he understood the gravity of the revelation. He was stunned, overwhelmed by the news that his birth parents might still be alive, or at least, that his origins were tangled in a mystery from another lifetime. The FBI then reached out to Martha and Harold Ellison with the news, reopening wounds that had begun to heal but never truly closed. The investigation quickly moved forward, now fueled by modern forensic technology and fresh leads. DNA evidence provided clarity that had been impossible before, and the FBI began piecing together new timelines and possible explanations for what had happened after Peter's disappearance. What had once been a tragic story of loss now held the potential for answers, but as the case reopened, the investigators found troubling details lurking beneath the surface. Hidden in dusty filing cabinets and forgotten evidence boxes were inconsistencies, strange gaps in Harold's statements, and unexplained trips he had made shortly after Peter vanished. The peaceful, devoted father portrayed in the community's memories no longer fit the growing picture. The FBI's renewed scrutiny was peeling back years of silence and secrets. For Martha, the arrival of the agents and the reopening of the case was both a blessing and a curse. Hope mixed with fear as she prepared to face a truth long buried, one that could change everything she thought she knew about her family. As the FBI delved deeper into the reopened case, new layers of mystery began to unfold. They started by retracing Eric Whitmore's adoption records, hoping to understand how a boy missing since 1975 ended up growing up in Ohio with a family that had no idea of his true identity. The adoption agency that handled his case was a small privately run organization in Kentucky, a state known during the 1970s and early 1980s for lax regulations around adoption practices. Paperwork was often incomplete, records lost, or at worst, deliberately altered. When the agents requested Eric's adoption files, what they found was far from straightforward. Several pages were missing, and some had been torn out with such care it appeared intentional. Others were faded and barely legible, suggesting years of neglect. But amidst the fragmented papers, a curious detail emerged. Harold Ellison's name appeared multiple times, but under different spellings and in connection with different locations. There was a strange pattern of financial transactions tied to those records, including a large cash withdrawal from Harold's bank account just weeks after Peter disappeared. The withdrawal was unusual, not the kind of routine expense for a school teacher, but something more secret. The agents began combing through Harold's activities from the fall of night. Phone records, bank statements, and travel logs showed a series of trips to Kentucky during that period. These trips were never mentioned in the original investigation. He had driven hundreds of miles in a rented car, returning with no clear explanation. Surveillance footage did not exist at the time, so only witnesses could verify his movements, and no one in Greenville remembered Harold ever leaving town. One breakthrough came when the FBI located a safe deposit box in a bank near Louisville, registered under a false name but connected through signatures to Harold Ellison. The box had been dormant for decades, but when agents opened it, they found startling content. Inside were forged documents related to Peter's adoption, handwritten notes, referencing arrangements and protection, and a photograph of Peter taken months after his official disappearance. The boy in the picture was smiling, dressed neatly, but clearly no longer in Greenville. This discovery was chilling. It suggested that Harold had not only known where Peter was after he vanished, but had been actively involved in kind of routine expense for a school teacher, but something more secret. The agents began combing through Harold's activities from the fall of night. Phone records, bank statements, and travel logs showed a series of trips to Kentucky during that period. These trips were never mentioned in the original investigation. He had driven hundreds of miles in a rented car, returning with no clear explanation. Surveillance footage did not exist at the time, so only witnesses could verify his movements, and no one in Greenville remembered Harold ever leaving town. One breakthrough came when the FBI located a safe deposit box in a bank near Louisville, registered under a false name but connected through signatures to Harold Ellison. The box had been dormant for decades, but when agents opened it, they found startling content. Inside were forged documents related to Peter's adoption, handwritten notes, referencing arrangements and protection, and a photograph of Peter taken months after his official disappearance. The boy in the picture was smiling, dressed neatly, but clearly no longer in Greenville. This discovery was chilling. It suggested that Harold had not only known where Peter was after he vanished, but had been actively involved in concealing his whereabouts. The FBI's confidence grew that Peter's disappearance was no random tragedy but a carefully orchestrated event with Harold at its center. As investigators continued piecing together the puzzle, they also uncovered disturbing rumors from the small circles Harold had moved in. Some recalled whispered disagreements between Harold and Martha about custody and family matters before Peter disappeared. Others hinted at a double life Harold might have led, one that contrasted sharply with the image of a loving father and husband. A woman from Kentucky, who had come forward after seeing a news report about the reopened case, claimed Harold had been seen with a boy matching Peter's description months after the disappearance. Her statement, once dismissed, now carried new weight. The agents knew they were close to uncovering a secret decades in the making, but as they prepared to confront Harold with their findings, they also realized that the truth would shatter everything Martha had believed. The man she had loved and trusted for nearly half a century was no longer the grieving father she had mourned alongside. He was something far more complicated and far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The FBI's investigation had reached a critical point. Armed with new evidence, they moved carefully but urgently to confront Harold Ellison. The once respected schoolteacher was now a man in his late 70s, living quietly in the same Greenville home where Peter had vanished all those years ago. When the agents arrived unannounced, they found Harold calm but guarded, his face weathered but still marked by the faint traces of the man he once was. The first shock came when the agents told him about the safe deposit box. Harold's eyes flickered with something unreadable, fear, guilt, or perhaps resignation, but he said nothing at first. With slow hands they showed him the forged adoption papers and the photograph of Peter smiling, months after the official disappearance date. The picture was a silent accusation, impossible to ignore. Harold's demeanor shifted. He no longer appeared as the broken father consumed by loss. Instead he grew distant, evasive, and at times confused. The agents pressed for answers, but his replies were fragmented and contradictory. He mentioned trips to Kentucky but refused to explain their purpose. When asked about the cash withdrawal, he claimed it was for private matters, but wouldn't elaborate. As the interrogation continued, the agents uncovered more troubling details. Harold had set up multiple bank accounts and used fake names to communicate with the adoption agency. The extent of his planning suggested premeditation. He wasn't simply trying to hide a mistake or a moment of weakness. He had orchestrated a plan to erase Peter from their lives, a secret kept hidden for nearly 5 decades. One of the most disturbing discoveries was a series of letters found tucked away in Harold's personal effects. Though unsigned and undated, the letters hinted at a growing desperation and internal conflict. They spoke of fear, fear of losing Martha, fear of losing control, and fear of the life he had built unraveling. The letters also revealed a man who justified his actions as necessary and protective, convinced that giving Peter away was an act of love, rather than betrayal. The FBI's investigation also uncovered inconsistencies in Harold's earlier statements to police and neighbors. He had claimed to be out searching for Peter the day he disappeared, but witnesses placed him miles away, in Kentucky during key moments. It was clear Harold had lied repeatedly. While Harold's health declined, the agents continued to piece together the timeline. The secret trips to Kentucky coincided with arranging Peter's adoption through the unregulated agency. Documents suggested Harold had paid substantial sums in cash to ensure the process went smoothly, and that no questions would be asked. The revelation hit Martha like a bombshell. She had spent years believing in Harold's innocence and mourning their lost son together. Now the man she had trusted was accused of hiding a dark secret that changed everything. The woman who had clung to hope was forced to confront a painful truth. Peter's disappearance was not an unfortunate tragedy but a betrayal woven into the fabric of their family. Harold's arrest followed soon after the interrogation, but due to his age and failing health, he was never able to stand trial. He was placed in a federal care facility where he would spend his remaining days. The town that had once admired him struggled to reconcile the image of the devoted husband and father with the man who had orchestrated his own son's disappearance. The peaceful life in Greenville was shattered. The secret Harold had buried for nearly 50 years was finally unearthed, revealing a chilling double life beneath the surface of a seemingly perfect family. The interrogation room was cold and quiet, a stark contrast to the years of silence that had cloaked the Ellison family. Harold, once composed and distant, now appeared fragile and lost, his hands trembling as he sat before the agent. The weight of decades pressed heavily on him, and though his mind was clouded by age and illness, the truth he had kept hidden for nearly half a century began to surface in broken fragments. Harold admitted that Peter's disappearance was not the random tragedy everyone believed. In his fractured recounting, he revealed a moment of anger and fear, one fueled by rumors and suspicions that Martha would leave him and take their son away. The couple's marriage had been strained for some time, tensions simmering beneath the surface but never spoken aloud. Harold's paranoia grew, twisted by his own insecurities and the pressure to maintain his role as the perfect husband and father. One evening in late August 1975, a heated argument erupted between Harold and Martha. Though the details were hazy, Harold claimed Martha accused him of betrayal, and he feared losing everything he had built. In a moment of panic, he made a decision he thought would protect Peter and himself. He staged the boy's disappearance, hoping to buy time and control the situation. Instead, he unleashed a chain of events that would haunt them forever. Harold arranged for Peter to be taken from Greenville and placed in the care of a private adoption agency in Kentucky. He paid large sums in cash to ensure the agency would not ask questions or reveal the truth. He forged documents, created false identities, and severed all official ties to his son. To the outside world, Peter vanished without a trace. To Harold, it was a desperate act of protection, a way to save Peter from a life he believed was doomed. As the years passed, Harold kept the secret buried deep. He maintained the facade of the grieving father, attending vigils and fundraisers, praying openly with Martha for their missing child. Each tear he shed was real, but so was the guilt that consumed him. The burden of his deception grew heavier with time, a silent weight that neither he nor Martha could escape. When the FBI uncovered the truth decades later, Martha's world shattered. She was forced to confront the unimaginable, that the man she had loved and trusted had betrayed her in the most profound way. The life they had built together was built on lies, and the grief she had carried was intertwined with a secret she never suspected. For Peter, now Eric, the revelation was equally devastating. The boy who had been taken from Greenville had grown into a man with no memory of his early years, no knowledge of the family he was born into. The reunion with Martha was tentative, filled with mixed emotions of hope, confusion and loss. Eric struggled to reconcile his identity with the man Harold once was, and the betrayal that had shaped his life. Harold's final years were spent in a federal care facility, removed from the community he once served. His mind deteriorated, leaving him unable to fully comprehend the consequences of his actions. The town of Greenville wrestled with the truth, mourning not only the loss of Peter but the shattering of a trusted image. In the end, Harold Ellison's story became a haunting reminder that even the most devoted families can hide dark secrets, and that sometimes the greatest betrayals come from the people we trust the most. The truth left a trail of pain, forgiveness, and a search for healing that would take a lifetime to begin. After Harold's confession and subsequent death in the care facility, the community of Greenville struggled to come to terms with the shocking revelation. For decades, Harold had been seen as a devoted husband and loving father, a man whose grief over his missing son had touched the hearts of many. Now, with the truth exposed, the town grappled with a mixture of disbelief, anger and sorrow. The legacy of the Ellison family was forever changed,
and people found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew. Martha, now in her late 70s, faced the most profound struggle of all. Her life had been built on love, trust and hope. The man she married and the husband she grieved for had kept a secret so deep it fractured her very understanding of her own past. The betrayal was not only of a husband's trust, but of a mother's hope, a hope that Peter was still out there somewhere waiting to come home. Despite the heartbreak, Martha showed remarkable strength. She chose to face the truth head-on, cooperating fully with the FBI and embracing Eric Whitmore, the man who had once been her son. Their reunion was bittersweet, marked by tears, silence, and the slow tentative steps of two people trying to piece together a fractured family. Eric struggled with his identity, raised by adoptive parents who loved him dearly but could never fill the void left by his unknown origins. He had lived a life unaware of the dark history connected to his birth. Now, with the truth revealed, he wrestled with feelings of anger, loss and confusion. Yet he also found a surprising sense of relief in finally knowing who he was and where he came from. His connection to Martha was complicated, layered with the pain of the past, but also the hope of building a future together. The FBI continued to investigate, turning their attention to the adoption agency that had facilitated Peter's placement. The agency, it turned out, had been part of a larger network operating in the shadows, specializing in handling children from troubled or secretive backgrounds. The loose regulations and lack of oversight in that era had allowed countless cases like Peter's to slip through the cracks. Some children were sold or traded, others were quietly adopted without proper documentation. The Ellison case became a catalyst for reform, pushing lawmakers to tighten adoption laws and improve protections for vulnerable children. In Greenville, the story became a cautionary tale, a reminder that beneath the surface of ordinary lives, secrets could fester for decades. The town memorialized Peter with a small plaque in the community park, honoring the boy whose disappearance had changed so many lives. Martha dedicated herself to helping families affected by missing children, using her experience to support others caught in similar pain. Though the scars remained, the Ellison family's story was no longer one of unanswered loss, but of difficult truths and unexpected healing. Martha and Eric, bound by blood and shared trauma, began to rebuild their relationship, discovering strength in their fragile new connection. Their journey was far from over, but it was a beginning, proof that even the darkest secrets could eventually give way to light. As the years passed, the story of Peter Ellison continued to ripple through the lives of those touched by the tragedy. What had begun as a simple missing child case had grown into a complex narrative of betrayal, secrets, and resilience. Martha and Eric, despite their age and the emotional scars they carried, worked together to find meaning beyond the pain. Martha devoted herself to advocacy, becoming a vocal supporter of missing and exploited children's rights. She partnered with national organizations to raise awareness about the dangers of unregulated adoption agencies and the importance of DNA testing in cold cases. Her personal story gave a powerful voice to those still searching for loved ones, and she spoke candidly about the devastating impact of secrecy and deception in families. Eric, meanwhile, struggled with his identity and the legacy of his past. His childhood had been filled with the love of adoptive parents, but the void left by unknown origins lingered. Learning the truth about his birth family stirred a tumult of emotions: grief for the family he never knew, anger at the deception that separated him from them, and confusion about where he belonged. With Martha's support, Eric sought therapy and joined support groups for adoptees and survivors of family trauma. His journey towards self-acceptance was gradual, marked by moments of pain and breakthrough. Together they embarked on a project to document Peter's story, a memoir that would not only chronicle the tragedy but also explore themes of forgiveness and hope. The process was cathartic, allowing both to process years of grief and betrayal. The memoir was intended not just as a record of their experience, but as a beacon for others navigating similar losses. The community of Greenville also found ways to heal. Local schools incorporated Peter's story into lessons on empathy and the importance of vigilance in protecting children. Law enforcement agencies used the case as a training example in handling cold cases and working with families of missing persons. The town held annual memorials to honor Peter and raise awareness about missing children, turning a painful chapter into a call for action. The story attracted attention beyond Greenville, inspiring documentaries, podcasts, and news features that examined the broader issues of family secrets, adoption scandals, and the evolving role of DNA technology in solving cold cases, Peter's story became a symbol of the changing landscape in law enforcement and adoption policy, illustrating how technology and persistence can bring light to the darkest corner. Despite the public attention, Martha and Eric kept their personal relationship private, choosing to nurture their bond quietly. They traveled together, visited the places of their past, and slowly built new memories.
The community of Greenville also found ways to heal. Local schools incorporated Peter's story into lessons on empathy and the importance of vigilance in protecting children. Law enforcement agencies used the case as a training example in handling cold cases and working with families of missing persons. The town held annual memorials to honor Peter and raise awareness about missing children, turning a painful chapter into a call for action. The story attracted attention beyond Greenville, inspiring documentaries, podcasts, and news features that examined the broader issues of family secrets, adoption scandals, and the evolving role of DNA technology in solving cold cases. Peter's story became a symbol of the changing landscape in law enforcement and adoption policy, illustrating how technology and persistence can bring light to the darkest corners. Despite the public attention, Martha and Eric kept their personal relationship private, choosing to nurture their bond quietly. They traveled together, visited the places of their past, and slowly built new memories. Their connection was unconventional, forged through shared history and profound loss, but it was genuine and healing. Though the wounds of the past could never fully disappear, the Ellison family's story was no longer defined solely by tragedy. It became a testament to human resilience, the capacity to face unimaginable pain, uncover painful truths, and still find a way forward. The legacy of Peter Ellison lived on, not only in the memories of those who loved him, but in the hope that no child's story would ever remain forgotten again. In the years following the public unveiling of the Ellison family's hidden past, the impact of their story continued to resonate far beyond Greenville. What had started as a quiet, tragic disappearance